My name is Tarciana Johnson. I'm 23 years old, married, and I have a 1-year-old son named Leo. On paper, it all sounds fine, right? Young family, bright future. But let me tell you, what's written on paper and what you feel in your heart, those are two completely different things. My husband, Nathan, is 29. We've been married for 2 years, and during that time, I've learned more about silence than joy. Nathan works for a large company. He walks with that chest-out confidence of someone who thinks a nameplate on the office door is worth more than dignity. I, on the other hand, work at a much humbler place, my father's small manufacturing company. We make screws, small parts, mechanical bits and pieces. It's not glamorous. Our building smells like metal and coffee, but it's honest work. And my father? He's one of the most hardworking and loyal men I've ever known. Nathan can't stand that. He hates the idea that I work there. He thinks it's embarrassing. He always says, "How can you work for a high school dropout in a greasy warehouse?" And that's my dad he's talking about. I used to argue, try to explain how dedicated my father is, how much he's sacrificed. But the more I defended my dad, the more Nathan's resentment grew. He doesn't just dislike my dad, he resents that I respect my father, that I won't choose him over my own blood. This conversation has played out more times than I can count. Nathan always brings it up over breakfast, like some twisted morning ritual. And this time wasn't any different. "Come on, Tarciana," he said, stirring his coffee without looking at me. "You graduated from a top-tier university. You're beautiful, smart. I want to brag about you at work. But how can I, when you're still working in that dump?" I didn't even look up. "We've had this conversation, Nathan. I'm not quitting." That's when his tone shifts. He leans back in his chair and throws out something like, "You're the only woman in the world who won't listen to me." Or, "If this keeps up, I don't see how we can make it work." And then he leaves, always leaves, but the damage stays behind. After these spats, he usually sends some passive-aggressive message to rub salt in the wound. That night, while I sat feeding Leo and staring at the cold plate of food I had set aside for Nathan, my phone buzzed. A photo. Him at a bar, smiling too close to a young female colleague. The caption read, "This is how I blow off steam. Quit that company or expect more." I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. I just sat there numb. For Leo's sake and for our parents, who oddly enough got along wonderfully, I replied, "I just wanted you home for dinner with us." He replied, "Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now." But I had already stopped waiting. Let me tell you something about marriages like mine. It's not always the shouting or the betrayal that breaks you. Sometimes it's the quiet erosion of your soul, the feeling of never being enough for someone who never truly saw you. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in the nursery. At first it was about convenience, but then I installed a lock on the door because Nathan started sneaking in during the night to complain about my father. One night his loud voice made Leo burst into tears in the dark. That's when I realized I wasn't protecting just myself. I was protecting my son from emotional poison. Nathan eventually stopped coming in, but I still locked the door. Habit or fear, I'm not sure. That morning's argument was still fresh in my mind when dinner time came. Nathan didn't show up. Again. Just that smug bar photo, that same old twisted manipulation. I felt nothing. But something strange happened the next morning. Nathan came to me with a wide smile. "I think I'm getting promoted soon." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? That deal went through?" "It's not final, but come on. The boss will cry tears of joy. Even the department head's going to have to bow down to me." And just like that, he didn't mention my dad. Not a word. For once, he was too wrapped up in his fantasies of power. I packed up Leo and went to my parents' house, like I always do before work. After dropping Leo off, I headed to my office. I barely made it in when Jake, one of our team members, came running. "Tarciana, something is off. The boss is furious. I mean, really mad." That alarmed me. My father is a patient man. He doesn't get angry often, but when he does, it's never for no reason. I went straight to the invention room. My father sat across from a young man, maybe in his mid-20s. The kid's face was streaked with tears. My father looked more furious than I had ever seen him. "Sorry, sweetheart, I don't have time right now," my father said, not even glancing at me. "I'm worried about you, Dad. Everyone is." He sighed and nodded toward an empty chair. "You can stay. Just listen." The young man turned to me and stood up, trying to compose himself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Scott. I'm so sorry for all the trouble." I nodded. "Can I ask what happened?" And that's when a story began to unfold, one that would unravel my entire world. Scott's voice was soft at first, like he was still trying to convince himself that everything he said had really happened. He told us he worked at a well-known electrical machinery manufacturer. Recently, he'd been promoted to assistant leader on a major project. The actual leader barely showed up, never came to meetings, didn't step foot on site, just a name on the documents. Honestly, Scott said, everyone preferred it that way. It made things smoother, so I ended up doing everything myself. At first, I was impressed. The way he spoke, his honesty, how much he clearly cared about the project. But the story took a turn. His team had chosen some of our company's components for their new machinery line. Without making an appointment, Scott showed up at our office and asked to meet the CEO, my father. He was met by Jackson and Randy, my father's longtime aides, loyal, sharp, and not the type to sugarcoat things. "Look, kid," Randy had told him, "you might want to fix your appearance before trying to talk to the CEO. Hair like that, all those rings, you look like you're here for a punk rock audition." Scott was stunned. He hadn't meant to be disrespectful. He was just being himself. He returned to his office and told his boss what happened. Instead of giving proper advice, his boss snapped, "Don't let them treat you like that. Go back and tell them we're using their parts whether they like it or not." But Scott didn't want to start a fight. He cared about this project. So he came back, head slightly bowed, asking Jackson and Randy, "Please tell me what I did wrong." My father had overheard the exchange and stepped in. He sat Scott down. "We're not judging you by how you look, but understand this," my dad said. "When you represent your company, the way you present yourself matters. Other companies will judge your whole team based on you." Scott got it. He really did. And he came back again, neatly dressed, no accessories, back straight. He apologized. He started over. That was the beginning of a solid partnership. Scott wasn't just a manager with ambition. He was curious, collaborative. My father saw that spark in him, and so did everyone else. Over the next few months, Scott's team regularly visited our company. It felt like a genuine collaboration, ideas bouncing, laughter in the meeting room, real teamwork. But then, right as the prototype was nearly done, something happened. Scott's face tightened as he described it. The team leader, he took all the presentation materials, claimed the credit. Then he had me removed as assistant leader, promoted some woman he's close with. Everyone had been shocked. The team rebelled. They demanded answers. But they were silenced. "They threatened to spread rumors about anyone who pushed back," Scott said. "People got scared." At this point, Jackson had had enough. "Rumors, huh? Empty threats, cowards' tricks." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and suspicion rising in my chest. "Why were you removed, really?" Scott looked embarrassed. "Because I reported a labor law violation. People on our team were being overworked. HR didn't like that." I glanced at my father, his jaw clenched. He turned to Scott and said, "You're the kind of person I want to work with. Come join us." Scott's eyes lit up. "Really? I'd love that. I've always admired how you all work together. You enjoy your work. You laugh even when things are tough." Something about the way he said that, so sincere, so vulnerable, made me pause. "Scott," I said, "what's the name of your company?" He told me. My blood ran cold. "And who's the team leader?" He hesitated, then answered, "Nathan Johnson." The silence in the room was deafening. My heart thudded in my chest. My father and I looked at each other in horror. Jackson was the first to speak. "Wait, Nathan Johnson? That's your husband, Tarciana." I took a breath. "Scott, I'm sorry, he's my husband." Scott's face fell. "Oh, I didn't mean to cause trouble." I shook my head. "You didn't. Actually, you may have saved me." Jackson stepped in, cautious now. "That woman, this female employee your boss favors. Any chance she's, involved with him?" Scott looked at me, hesitating again. I saved him the discomfort. "Don't worry, it's a sham marriage at this point. I sleep with a lock on my door. I haven't felt anything for him in a long time." My father looked shocked. That's when I decided to finally tell him everything. Nathan's verbal threats, the guilt-tripping, the emotional manipulation, the photos from the bar, the arguments over breakfast, the late-night rants that scared Leo. I cried. My father just listened. When I finished, he placed his hand over mine. "That explains a lot," he said. "Leo's been distant with me lately. I thought I did something wrong." He paused, looking me in the eyes. "I don't care what people say about me. I've lived an honest life. But hearing you endure insults about your parents, that must have been hell." He straightened up. "You're always welcome here. Anytime you want to come home." His words hit me like a warm blanket on a cold night. I hadn't realized how heavy the burden was until he helped lift it. Jackson, still standing nearby, asked, "About that woman at Nathan's office, do we have proof?" Scott replied, "Nothing concrete, just rumors. People have seen them leave meeting rooms together, lunch breaks, but it's not confirmed." That's when Randy pulled out his phone. "Time to confirm," he said. "I've got a friend in private investigations. Let's get some eyes on this." Jackson was already dialing. "And I'll contact a lawyer, someone who specializes in divorce due to infidelity." My dad chuckled, watching them. "Your greatest strength, Tarciana, is knowing how to act when it matters." Scott, bless him, offered to help however he could. "I'll keep watch. If anything happens, I'll let you know." That afternoon, things began moving quickly. The private investigator and the lawyer showed up at our office and had a planning meeting in one of the back rooms. Jackson was assigned as the communicator. Later that day, I went to pick up Leo from my parents' place. I sat down with them and told them everything. I apologized for pretending all this time that things were fine. I had made them believe I was happy. But instead of being angry, my mother looked relieved. "We'll get a room ready for you and Leo," she said. "I knew from the beginning Nathan wasn't right. The way he looked at your father's office that first day, I saw it. I wish I'd told you sooner." She hugged me. "You're telling me now. That's what matters." The very next day, things started to unravel faster than I expected. Jackson got a call from Scott. His voice was firm this time, almost energized. "I resigned," he said. "I told them I'd stay to hand over tasks, but I wouldn't take paid leave. I'm done." But that wasn't even the shocking part. Apparently, Scott's resignation had sparked something inside the rest of his team. One by one, they went to the HR department saying, "We broke the same rules Scott did. If you punish him, punish us too." They weren't letting him take the fall alone. When the HR reps saw those letters, they panicked. No one expected solidarity like that. Meanwhile, Nathan, completely unaware, had already left the office before the chaos began. But it was too late. The company president and department heads had called an emergency meeting. Everyone from the project team, including Scott, was there. They laid it all out. Nathan hadn't been to a single meeting. He'd never contributed a line of code, a diagram, or even a suggestion. He wasn't just incompetent. He was completely absent. Yet he swooped in at the last moment, took the materials everyone had worked on, and announced he was the genius behind it all. And then he removed Scott and replaced him with Alice, a young woman with no relevant experience. Just because she smiled at him, I suppose. The president was furious. Scott could have easily encouraged everyone to push for punishment right away, but he didn't. Instead, he calmly said, "I think we should wait. A private investigation is already underway. The client's sister-in-law is involved. Let's wait for the evidence." That sister-in-law was me. And just like that, the entire company agreed. They would wait, gather facts, and let the truth speak for itself. That night, Nathan came home unusually late. Leo was already asleep, and I was sitting on the couch pretending to read. Nathan burst through the door like he was the hero in his own fantasy movie. "You won't believe how useless people are," he said, throwing down his keys. "I've been working overtime while they sit around doing nothing." He plopped down across from me, all puffed up with pride. "They're jealous, you know. Because I'm getting promoted, department head. It's already decided." I bit my lip, barely holding in the laugh. "Wow, really?" "Yep. The CEO even had a long talk with the current head. I'm pretty sure he said, 'I'd rather have Nathan Johnson in charge than you.'" He chuckled at his own delusion. "And once that happens, babe, that little company your dad runs, it'll look even worse compared to mine. I mean, you should really think about quitting. Be a full-time wife to the next department head." That was it. I stood up and spoke louder than I meant to. "Don't you dare talk about my parents like that." He blinked, confused. "You know how close our parents are. You know they love Leo. You keep insulting them and expect me to sit here smiling?" His face twisted. "Then tell them to stop coming to our house. I don't want them at birthdays, holidays, nothing. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women lining up once I get that promotion." I stared at him, calm, cold, certain. "Are you sure about that?" I asked. He scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't contact me again," I said. "I'm done." And then, with the papers I had prepared ahead of time, I said 5 words I never thought I'd say out loud. "Sign the divorce papers, Nathan." He looked stunned. He didn't even argue, just signed, like he didn't believe I was serious. The next morning I called my father. "It's time," I said. He and the guys from the company came over with a truck. We started packing everything. My things, Leo's things, a few toys. I didn't want anything from Nathan except my freedom. Then something unexpected happened. My in-laws showed up. "We came to help," Nathan's father said. I was speechless. His mother stepped forward and hugged me. "We're so sorry, we had no idea." I held back tears. "Thank you for still loving Leo." Nathan's dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "Our idiot son is disowned, but we still want to be grandparents to Leo if that's okay with you." I nodded, overwhelmed. "Of course, I want him to have all the love he can get." My father smiled and shouted from the back of the truck, "Let's wrap this up. We've got a home to return to." Nathan's dad grinned. "Let's do it." Once the move was done, I showed everyone the signed papers. The room was quiet but peaceful. I wasn't afraid anymore. My mom turned to Nathan's mom with a sparkle in her eyes. "Mary, how about some embroidery this weekend? There's an art exhibit opening." "I'd love that," she said, smiling. My dad chuckled and poured drinks. "Ken, Mary, why don't you stay over tonight? Let's celebrate new beginnings." They did. I let them enjoy their evening while I tucked Leo into bed and went to lie down beside him. I looked at his tiny face, his peaceful sleep. We were safe. We were free. But Nathan's story wasn't over just yet. The day after I left, Nathan walked into his office like he owned the place. He had no clue what was coming. Around mid-morning, he was summoned to the large conference room. Inside were the CEO, department heads, Scott, the project team, and, much to his shock, Alice, the young woman he had chosen to promote. There was no casual greeting, no friendly smile, just tense silence. The CEO began. "Mr. Johnson, we're conducting a formal review. You are to respond truthfully." Nathan tried to smirk, but it faltered as soon as he saw the stack of printed evidence on the table. "First," the CEO said, "is it true you took credit for a project you had no part in creating?" Nathan hesitated. Then he glanced around the room, saw the faces, and realized there was no escape. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I did." The CEO narrowed his eyes. "And why did you remove Mr. Scott from his leadership position?" Nathan cleared his throat. "I believed Alice was more capable." That's when one of the senior department heads snapped. "You mean the woman who has no technical background and spends her day making coffee?" Nathan went quiet. His lip trembled. He looked like a balloon deflating in real time. But the worst was yet to come. The CEO gave a nod. The lights dimmed. A screen came down. A click. And there it was. Footage from hidden cameras placed in the document in conference rooms. Images of Nathan and Alice, laughing, flirting, even kissing, played in front of everyone. Nathan paled. Alice gasped. The CEO turned to Alice. "Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?" She straightened up like nothing had happened. "Mr. Johnson said if we were together, I wouldn't have to worry about being laid off. He made it easy for me to get by. I have a boyfriend anyway. It wasn't serious. Just part of the job, I guess." A murmur ran through the room. Nathan's face turned red, then white. "You what? You had a boyfriend? You used me? You ruined my life!" Alice threw it right back at him. "You have a wife, Nathan. Don't even start." The room exploded in whispers. The CEO stood up, clearly disgusted. "That's enough. The investigation is complete. Mr. Johnson, Miss Ford, you're both suspended until further notice. Do not return to work unless contacted." They were escorted out in silence. I learned all of this that evening, sitting with my father and Scott in our office. Scott was calm, almost serene. "I didn't want to ruin him," he said. "I just wanted truth." But Nathan's spiral had just begun. He was reassigned to the lowest department in the company, basically the forgotten basement where old documents went to die, from department head hopeful to a glorified file clerk. And Alice? Her boyfriend found out. Her office life became unbearable. She resigned quietly, unable to face the stairs. And then came the legal consequences. Our lawyer had everything ready: evidence, video, testimony. Nathan was ordered to pay me $3 million in damages. Alice had to pay $2 million for her role in the affair. To cover it, both of them took out loans from consumer finance companies with sky-high interest rates. But I wasn't done protecting Leo. I had Nathan sign an additional agreement, $5,000 per month in child support, no excuses. He agreed, not because he cared, but because he was too broken to fight back. Weeks passed, then months. One day I bumped into someone who used to work with Nathan. "I saw him," they whispered. "He looks old, like he's aged 20 years, works 2 jobs now, convenience store during the day, parking lot security at night. He looked 60, they said, hunched over, hair going gray." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't wish for that ending. But I did feel relief, because justice had been served, quietly, fairly. Leo was thriving now. He laughed more. He played with my parents, who doted on him endlessly. My in-laws visited often, bringing snacks, books, and warm hugs. Despite what happened to their son, they never stopped loving Leo. And for that, I was grateful. As for me, I returned to work at my father's company, but something had shifted. I stood taller, I spoke louder, I no longer apologized for taking up space. One afternoon, my father looked at me from across the lunch table and said, "You remind me of your mother, brave, strong, unapologetically kind." I smiled. The storm had passed, and I had survived it, not by running, not by fighting, but by standing still and letting the truth rise. Now, I'm not saying life's perfect, but it's honest, and honest feels a whole lot better than perfect ever did.